In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. Marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but the stories you tell. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin. Today we're diving into the power of storytelling in marketing, the role of psychology in consumer behavior, and strategies for creating content that converts. Our guest today is Alison Ver Halen, founder of AV Writing Services. With a background in English and psychology, Alison discovered her passion for content marketing when she began the writing posts for a law firm. Today, she helps businesses attract, engage, and convert their ideal clients through blog writing, website copy, engage, email marketing, and integrated SEO strategies. Alison is passionate about combining compelling narrative with marketing science to give her client the best chance at growth and success. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Alison Ver Halen, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
I'm very excited as well, and it's a pleasure to have done your podcast. Now I perhaps extended the invitations to do mine, and to kick us off, please tell us more about AV Writing Services.
Yeah, so I named it after myself, AV as in Alison Ver Halen. I didn't want to overthink it too much. Writing services, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. It's writing services. It is more than that, as I have incorporated SEO, search engine optimization services, more and more into the services that I provide, but that it's all content-based SEO, because you can't have an effective SEO strategy without content, and vice versa. So there is more to SEO than just the content, but that is the basis of how Google figures out who you are and what you're talking about and whether or not you're trustworthy and whether to send people your way. So we do a number of things at AV Writing Services. Obviously, we want to make sure it's there to make Google happy. We also want to make sure that it tells a good story to not only keep people engaged, but that is one of the best ways for people to actually remember and understand what you're doing is through story. So we need to make sure that it tells a good story. It's in line with your brand. So it sounds like you. It sounds and feels like what people get when they work with you, when they get products or services from you. And then it's also got to have that marketing funnel built in, right? Because, okay, they got to your website, now what? What is the next step? So part of what we do is kind of reverse engineer that and figure out, all right, so they got to your website and they read this piece of content. Where are they likely to be in the buyer journey? What makes sense as the next step in the buyer journey, and then how are we going to motivate them to take that next step? So we work all of that into the content that we provide for our clients. So I called it AV Writing Services just to make it really super easy. This is who I am. This is what I do. But there is, as always, there's always a lot more to it behind the name.
Got it. Absolutely. And obviously, let's go back to sort of the very beginning of all of this. I know the story already, but I won't spoil the audience too much. But obviously, you have an academic background in English and psychology. And it seemed like you obviously did not initially realize how perfectly aligned these fields were with content marketing. So tell me more about how did your academic background in English and psychology shape your approach to marketing today, and how you basically got started with all of that?
Yeah, well, how I got started with it is, as you said, I did major in English and psychology because I love both of them. initially wasn't even planning on majoring in either of those. I was going to do something else entirely. But I love English, have always loved reading and writing. So I couldn't really stay away from that. And then when I took a psych class, also fell in love with that, and just kind of fell down that rabbit hole. So yeah, like you said, had no idea I was getting the perfect degree for content marketing, did not know what content marketing was. I thought I wanted to work in publishing, graduated in 2009, right after the job market crashed, and publishing in particular was taking a hit with the rise of Kindle and ebooks. So had to figure something else out, ended up answering phones for a few years, found myself between jobs at one point, and my roommate at the time, her dad, who was an attorney, was awesome and offered to give me stuff to do around his office until I got back on my feet. And one of the things he needed was someone to write blog posts for his law firm. And he knew I had a strong writing background, so he offered me the gig, and I was like, wait, I can get paid to write? Seriously?
Yep.
Yes, let's do that. So I jumped at that chance and started writing for him, and then for an associate of his, and then for some friends of mine, and it just kept growing from there. So yeah, as far as to answer your question about how the English and psychology works into what I'm doing now, I mean, I mentioned earlier, storytelling is a big part of what we do when we're creating content for our clients. And that has always been the case from that very first client. He was writing his own blog post before hiring me, and not as bad as you might expect, but I could definitely see how he was not, if not losing clients, he certainly was not doing himself any favors in terms of attracting, engaging, and converting those leads. So what I brought to the content that I was writing for him was that storytelling aspect. And then just a simple call to action at the end. And it went really well. He came back to me after 6 months and told me I had brought in $75,000 worth of business to his law firm just through the blog posts I was writing. I wish I could say he was paying me more than $75,000 for those 6 months worth of blog posts. That is not the case. So suffice to say, he got a significant return on that investment. So that was kind of my first light bulb moment of, oh, this is not just busy work that he's giving me. This isn't just him doing me a favor. This is having real results for his business. But how I was doing that was all through storytelling, and that all comes from my English degree, not just learning about grammar, but also the structure of a story, and how to structure it to keep people engaged, and keep them reading, or in this case, watching or listening, depending on your medium. And then, yeah, as far as the psychology, it's understanding, how do you earn people's trust? It comes down to understanding their mindset. It comes down to simple things like using the same language that they use, which you can understand lawyers have a problem with because they tend to slip into Latin without even realizing they're doing it, right? So leave the Latin at home, leave the jargon at home, talk to your people about what it is that you can do for them. Getting that call to action, figuring out what the right call to action is, phrasing it in a way that says, hey, look, if you don't take action now, this is what you're missing out on. Understanding what is going to motivate them to do that. And if they're not motivated yet, understanding that too. Understanding that maybe they're not ready for a consultation yet, but they might be ready for your webinar, or signing up for your newsletter, or doing something else that can lead them to eventually that consultation and that sales call.
Yes, absolutely. It reminds me of a quote by Franklin Jones. He said something along the lines of, your vocation in life comes from when you find a job, perhaps, that you will do it, you love it so much, you'll do it for free, but then you find somebody that will pay you to do it, right, on top of that, which I think is perfectly fitting to your situations. You talk about this sort of first gig that really sparked the flame. I want to go deeper into this because I think there's always some incredible insights in sort of the genesis portion of all stories. But what do you remember most about that first writing project for the law firm? Was it very different for you to write basically professionally instead of perhaps as a hobby? Or tell me more about perhaps just how big of a deal was this first writing projects, and what I suppose marked you the most within that experience?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I had been writing stories for myself for forever. I had also been writing English papers and book reports and all of that for school. But I had also had an internship, a summer internship when I was in college, the summer between junior and senior years. I was working for a local magazine in Appleton, Wisconsin. For I don't know if any of your listeners know where that is, but the small town in the middle of Wisconsin had a local magazine that, I did a free internship there where I wrote stories for them. I went out and I interviewed people for stories, and then I got to write the stories about it. So because it was a free internship, I got a lot of on the job training. Like, okay, we understand this is how you write essays. That's not how you write a magazine article. This is how you write a magazine article. So I got to learn on the job the tricks of the trade there, which really helped when it came to writing blog posts. It is kind of a similar idea. Sometimes you have someone you've interviewed and you're quoting, not always. But the idea of structuring it around this story really came in handy in terms of applying that to the blogging that I was doing. And then the call to action was something new. That was not something I'd ever done before. So again, I was very lucky in working for this law firm and getting this first client that they were willing to give me some on the job training in terms of, here's how we tend to structure it. Here's how it works. Lawyers, compliance is a big deal. So they were also fortunately willing to teach me, okay, we can say these things. We're not allowed to say these things. We can use this word, but not this word. And that was super helpful because I have used that ever since to work with other lawyers and people in other regulated industries and be able to say, yes, I can write for you and keep it in compliance because I have experience with that and I understand how that all works. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, I think big things often have small beginnings. Certainly, I think it's great that it started sort of as a grassroots, from the grassroots, basically in your story. Once that a quote of yours that really marked me because, to be honest, I think it's a fantastic way to sort of summarize how you're able to marry SEO with storytelling. But you said SEO without a story is robotic. Story without SEO is invisible. I don't know if you recall saying that, but I certainly do. And it was very interesting to me to sort of hear you talk about it because I really think I had this very interesting conversation with Seth Godin, and which I'm sure you're familiar with, right?
Of course,
And,
everyone has Seth Godin.
He was talking about the fact that marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but the story you tell, perhaps. And you've been 100%. At this sort of angle for quite a bit now, but I think that you really have sort of your own twist on that story. So how do you, I suppose, tangibly integrate storytelling into your SEO-driven content strategy? And perhaps what's a few tips for others to be able to do the same?
Yeah, so there are a few different ways to do it. My favorite is to use what I call the Cinderella formula, because the Cinderella story is one that everyone is familiar with. It is by no means limited to Cinderella. This is the same formula that probably 90% of Hollywood movies use, is where you start off with a pain point, right? So in the case of Cinderella, it's, her father just died and she's stuck with her, and her mom has been dead for a while now, so she's stuck with her stepmother and two stepsisters. And for that, we always want to start with the pain point again, because we want to get people's attention and we want them to understand that we understand where they're coming from. So starting with that pain point is a way to get them go, oh yeah, this is super annoying. And you get it. You get that it's super annoying or painful, depending on what that pain point is. It might be a minor pain point. It might be something that's semi-problematic, but not causing them to lose sleep yet. Or maybe it is something that's causing them to lose sleep. And so this is really urgent. But wherever they're at, you have to make them understand that, yes, we know where you're at. Here's this pain that you're dealing with. And then you're going to twist the knife. You're going to make it even worse. Right? So not only is she an orphan now, she's living with her stepmother and stepsisters who turn out to be awful and force her to work as a scullery maid. And what you're going to do in terms of that, how that translates to the story that you're telling for your clients, is this is what's going to happen if you don't solve the problem. This is how it's going to get even worse. This is what else you're going to suffer if you don't solve the problem. And then you sweep in as the fairy godmother with the solution. And this is where I tend to get into with a blog post. You always want to provide some value. You don't want to just have it all sales copy. It should tell people actionable tips they can use to make their life better right now without hiring you or buying something from you. So this is your, 3 tips to do such and such, or 5 ways you can do X, Y, Z, or whatever that meat of the blog post is. That's where you're going to put that. And then paint a picture of what that looks like for them, right? So think of Cinderella at the ball, gorgeous ball gown, dancing with the prince. This is as good as her life has ever been, and honestly probably ever will be, right? So paint that picture for your clients. What does it look like once they've solved this problem? How much better will their life be? What can they do with that load off of their mind? So paint that picture for them, really make it emotional. There's, I think, this tendency, especially in B2B content, to take the emotion out of it, because we think people only buy based on the numbers, and that's not true. They buy based on the emotion. They use the numbers to justify it. So tap into those emotions, because it's still real humans buying your stuff. It's just the humans working for a business rather than humans buying for themselves or their family. So paint that picture, make it super emotional, but then bring it back to the pain point, right? Remind them, again, Cinderella after the ball her carriage turns back into a pumpkin, and her dress goes back to tatters, and the glass slipper disappears, and she has to run home and go back to working for her awful stepmother and stepsisters. And then you leave it there. You don't give your audience the happily ever after, because they haven't earned it yet. They have to reach out to you. Remind them, yes, you can get, so far with these tips I've given you. But you gotta reach out for that consultation. You gotta have a conversation or buy this thing if you really want to get your happily ever after with your prince.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. So pain points, example of those symptoms, and then afterwards, perhaps what the solution looks like, making sure that you perhaps put yourself, meaning from company perspective, as the solution, the ideal solution provider for such things. But then where it's very special, which I really love actually, is afterwards, obviously the emotions around just how much your life will be better because of it. But then it coming back to that pain point, perhaps, in sort of this way of keeping it open ended, and afterwards, boom, basically cutting it with the call to actions, and that's the next step you want them to take, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So that formula, perhaps you just said that 90% of Hollywood movies and so on is where did you learn that formally? Was it more basically just based on how much you did it? Where does that come from for you?
That I think actually came from one of my theater classes. So in addition to majoring in English and psychology, I minored in theater, because I also have a love of the theater. So I think that was in one of my theater classes where we were learning about kind of the basics of how most plays are structured. And so Cinderella was a big one that I remember learning about early on. And it's one of those things where once you recognize the formula, you see it in every Hollywood, like I said, almost every Hollywood movie. Not 100%, but probably 90-something%.
Very interesting. Do you think that one theory that I always loved was, because obviously theater is art, writing is art, cinema is art, and so on. This concept of art shaping culture is always something that I'm fascinated by. For you that has been able to explore a couple of these medium, how similar or were you, basically let me go back a little bit. In theater, were you actually playing, or you were studying the art media as a sort of a form?
Both. So I
Okay.
think I took intro to theater, where we were reading plays and we were studying and we were discussing them. I did take 1 or 2 acting classes, and I had taken acting classes before getting to college just for fun. I did set building. I did sound. I was working the soundboard for one of the plays that we did in college.
Okay.
I did a little bit of everything.
Interesting. So try to correlate basically these arts for me, if you could, meaning that in you playing basically a theater perhaps piece, or writing again a blog, or anything perhaps that is artsy, which you seem to be quite a creative, right side brained, basically heavy for sure. I don't know you that much, but it seems like it from your background certainly. Was Did all of it come naturally to you? Is it similar, perhaps the way you feel when you're performing it? Is it very similar from a psychological standpoint? Tell me more about the experience across these art forms.
Yeah, so that's actually how I got into psychology, is because back in the day I thought I wanted to be an actress. And so I took my first psych class thinking that it would help me understand my characters better. So that's what got me into psychology. And then I was completely hooked into psychology and ended up majoring in it, even though that was not my initial intention. So funnily enough, it was the art that brought me to science. But the science does inform the art. And whether you're talking about theater or writing or marketing, understanding what makes us tick and why is super important for being effective.
It is. It's. I think it goes hand in hand. I think there's not one without the other. What do you think is your
100%.
favorite psychology book, if you had to name one?
Oh, gonna make me think of one off the top of my head. It's actually been a really long time since I've read a psychology book.
Oh yeah.
And it was, yeah, it's funny. I hadn't even thought about that until you mentioned it. Um, I don't think I've read one in a while. Um, it probably would have been, and I'm not even sure it counts as a psychology book. But it's something that you and I talked about not too long ago, off air before we started recording for my podcast, was the book They Ask You Answer,
Oh, okay.
by Marcus Sheridan, which I don't think he would call a psychology book, but I remember it being, that's really all it comes down to, right? Is like, this is what makes people tick. This is why they come to your website. This is what they're looking for when they get to your website. So give them what they're looking for. And actually, the other one that I did read was Atomic Habits,
Oh yeah.
which is a really good book. Again, one that I'm not sure I got a lot out of because I have the degree in psychology. So I was like, yeah, I already understand a lot of this, how to trick myself into doing these things, and had already used a lot of those tools. But for someone who has not taken any psych courses, highly recommend that book, Atomic Habits, because it will enlighten for you why you may be doing some things that you don't want to do and why you may not be doing the things that you should be doing and how to trick yourself into doing those things.
Yes. No, James Clear's, phenomenal book. Atomic Habits, one of my favorite productivity book of all time, certainly. I suppose, were you always the type to go perhaps to the bottom of things, meaning that typically creatives, and I'm making a generalization just for illustrating my points, but you definitely, like I said, are a very creative person, always been from your background and from what I know from you. I suppose, was it always very natural to you to also go into the sciencey aspect of it, the understanding of it, getting down basically to the bottom of it? I suppose, were you always this detailed, or that came to you later in life?
No, I think that definitely came later in life. I mean, psychology I got interested in because I didn't think of it as science. Growing up, I really leaned into, I'm a reader, I'm a writer, I'm very words based. I hate numbers, I hate science.
Oh,
All of
interesting.
my worst classes were my worst grades were in math and science, except for chemistry. For some reason, something about chemistry clicked for me. I don't know what it is, but no, it kind of took a while. And it might have been majoring in psychology and like actually, coming up with, hypotheses and figuring out ways to test them and running the tests and analyzing the data and doing all of that stuff that I did find very interesting, because that for me, I think, was the light bulb going off in terms of understanding that numbers can tell a story. which
Yes.
no one had ever explained to me before. But as I've said over and over again in this podcast, and we'll probably say more, I'm very drawn to stories. So if you can put it in whatever format, you can put it on a stage or a screen or in my ears or in a book or whatever, and I will consume it. So it doesn't matter if the story is told in numbers, as long as I can read it, understand it, then I will consume those stories. So that was probably when that started for me, was as a psych major going, oh, this is actually really cool and really interesting.
Yes. Okay. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So more on the creative, naturally more on the creative side, and then sort of got interested into looking deeper into it. I think that's the case for most creative. Most creative that I know are extremely concept related. So they are very big picture thinkers. What we know from a biological standpoint is that the more creative you are, typically the more open basically you are from a personality standpoint, typically very tolerant sort of people. And that also correlates to typically political and inhuman belief and values, which is very interesting. And then it seemed like when you got a little bit older, you sort of sort of became interested in understanding perhaps why it make other takes, what it make you take also. I think, I feel, which is quite interesting. You talk about this concept of writing to convert, right? Just not just to impress, but to actually convert, to actually get basically results, just like for this law firm, for example. So you really have sort of a balance on creativity, but also a focus on compelling actions, and not just sort of clever prose, which I personally really adore. But you know what? I understand the necessary of actions also. So
Right.
when you think about it, I suppose, what's the biggest mistake that businesses makes when trying to convert readers into buyers? Is it basically too much fluff? Is it the lack of emotions? What do you think is the sole biggest perhaps mistake they're doing when they're trying to actually get to the bottom of the conversion, which is obviously optimally the objective?
Right. It's one of the most important pieces of parts of your content. And yeah, it is a lot harder than it sounds. It seems like it should be like, okay, you like this, give us a call. And I think that's actually one of the biggest or most common mistakes I see, especially in the industries I serve, which is those professional service industries, and the B2B industries, where you tend to have this longer buyer journey, and you tend to have people consuming a lot of content before they're ready to pick up the phone or fill out the form or whatever it is they need to do to actually have a conversation with you and then hire you. A lot of people, I think their instinct is to go straight for call us, schedule a whatever, schedule a consultation, which we all know is code for sales call, right? And they're just not ready yet. I tend to compare that to proposing on the first date, right? They're just getting to know you. They don't even know if they want a second date, much less if they're ready to get engaged, to put a ring on it. So it's much more effective usually to lead them to another piece of content. Hey, if you liked this, here are some related pieces that we created that you might also like. Ask them on a second date. Ask them for, maybe you're ready for the weekend getaway. That might be the webinar. That might be signing up for the newsletter. It can be a little bit of a commitment, but it shouldn't be a huge commitment for them. But figuring out what makes sense as the next step in that buyer journey. What step are they comfortable taking that will still get them a little bit closer to that sales call?
Nice. Okay. And obviously when you're thinking about the psychology of content, there's this, you mentioned it a few times, but psychology informing you of your understanding of the buyer journey, user intent, and even to a certain extent, I think persuasive writing, to me, and that's what we do at Core Centrica also, the understanding of perhaps what people are thinking, and therefore understanding those triggers that will make them move to whatever outcomes you desires. That's where the gold mine is. Now, you said something quite powerful, which is, and I want to sort of bounce an idea off of you to get your opinion on it. There was this huge B2B basically study that was made I don't recall exactly who it was made by, but it was definitely a credible source. And it basically said that 80% of sales now comes from buyers that engage with you after they made that decisions, meaning that you having a sales call with them is typically not only 20% of the time the reason why they're moving forward, no matter how good or perhaps how terrible of a salesperson you are. They're typically making the decisions far before even engaging with you formally. Does that correlate with your experience? And how can we use that stat to inform our strategy moving forward?
100%. Yeah, I am not a great salesperson. I am much more comfortable writing and hiding behind my computer than I am being on a phone or even on a Zoom call convincing someone to give me their credit card. But I remember being on a phone with someone, and it was a sales call. We had met, I think I'd given a presentation at an event they were at, and then they signed up for my newsletter. And they kept reading my newsletter for months before they were ready to hire me. And then they reached out. And so we had a conversation about it. And not only were they ready to hire me, they actually upsold themselves on the call by quoting something that I had written in a recent blog post. It was the easiest sales call I've ever had. I mean, aside from the ones that like come straight from referrals, which is great too. But that was, again, kind of a light bulb moment for me in terms of, content is not just there to sit on my website and be like, look, I'm blogging. Look, it's pretty. It was really having a real effect on my business and my ability to convert those leads. Before, I don't think I'd even taken any sales training at that point. I have since, but this was fairly early days of my business where that was really like, oh, this is really cool. They just read all my stuff and the content converted them. And I think that's such a missed opportunity for a lot of people, especially since I hear a lot of people complaining about the misinformation that they see online. And then people get on the phone with them and, it's supposed to be a sales call and the prospect ends up telling the professional how to do their job because they read something somewhere online that turned out to be completely false, but it gave them the idea that they know what they're talking about and they don't. So the antidote to that is to have your own content that does educate them on how your industry actually works and how you work with your clients. And again, what they can expect when they work with you. Again, back to that Cinderella story where you paint that lovely picture for them, but also make sure it's realistic. Don't promise them a palace if you're only giving them like a mansion or an estate palace or something.
It's interesting, and that seems to be at the very bottom of everything that you're doing is this concept of teachings, right? One thing that I see you doing a lot is teaching clients how to think about content, basically from not only your perspective but from, I suppose, their perspective also. So it sort of give you this sort of edge where I'm sure that a lot of your sales calls, if you want to call them this way, conversion basically related calls, are based upon the fact that they know you from someplace else, which I think reinforces the piece of data that I just gave, because we live in a world now where our information is as free as it will ever be. All right, it is.
Yeah.
We live in the information age, and the 2000s will be basically set as basically from mankind history as the age of technology, as the age of informations. And therefore, there's now a very interesting sort of paradox, which is, and I always debate this with people, but Francis Bacon told us knowledge was power. I disagree with him. Applicable knowledge is power. You can have all the information you'd like, but if you're not able to apply it, or perhaps, again, there's some false biases within that information, then you might be even less effective than you were before learning it. So it's so important nowadays to actually teach your clients on how to either utilize your product if you have a product-based business, or again, why they should hire you, and perhaps what difference would that make from a business perspective. So I suppose if you had to give me sort of the formula, how do you help clients move from tactical, basically content requests, such as this person that just hired you, to long-term strategy where they either upsell themselves or you find a way to basically maintain the interest, or not only maintain but upscale the interest based on basically what they were able to find prior to that conversation?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase that question?
Yeah, so I suppose if we both agree that people make the decisions prior to getting on that sales calls, basically, how do you perhaps help your clients move from tactical content requests where they just want to hire you for contents, just like the examples you give, to long-term strategies where they either upsell themselves based on the content you have, or perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose upsell themselves because of what they found about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, again, it all comes back to having it in that content. And it varies from industry to industry because what I do for my clients is actually doing it for them. Yes, I have the strategy and I put that together for them. But I'm also writing the content for them. In some cases, I'm putting it up on their website and publishing it for them. So, my goal in creating all that content and teaching them how to do stuff is I'm willing to give away all of my secret sauce for free because my goal is to kind of overload them with information and have them go, oh, I can't do all of that. I thought blogging would be easy and I would just need, 3 magic tips and then I could do everything. And the more they dig into my content, the more they're going to understand, there's blogging and there's keyword research and there's understanding your ideal client and putting together marketing personas and crafting the perfect call to action. And then there's topic, content pillars and topic clusters and all that. And it does get to be a lot. So by spelling it all out for them and laying it out for them of everything that goes into it, it's a lot easier to upsell them because they understand how much is going into it. Not everyone works that way. A lot of my clients are actually business coaches where what they are selling is their knowledge. So they do want to give people some knowledge, some actionable knowledge, as you said. And I do love that, your point on that about actionable knowledge being the real power
Nice.
there. So they do want to give them some of that, but they know they can't give them too much because if they give away all their secret sauce, no one has a reason to hire them. So for them, it's all about finding that perfect balance. And I had one client who said she wants to help people who can't afford to hire her just give them enough knowledge to a point where they can hire her. They can't afford to hire her, and then she can help them get to the next level and the next level after that. So figuring out where that line is for you is key. But if you are someone, I even talked to a lawyer at one point about how he didn't want to give away his secret sauce. I'm like, no one who is going to hire you is going to go to law school and get the whole law degree so they can do all of this themselves. I wouldn't worry about giving away too much information if you're in a profession where there's a lot of knowledge and experience and studying that went into getting to where you are.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much because we do see this debate quite often, and even with some of our clients, there is this sort of tendency to sort of believe that because now it is freely accessible, somehow they just become a lawyer overnight. It's a very, it's very interesting to see. Well, actually, no, that's what makes me sort of special. So if I just say it to somebody, perhaps there would just be a bunch of copycats. And look, if it would be so simple to influence people to perhaps do great things, man, the world would be a much easier place to go by, certainly. But I think people drastically overestimate the likelihood of somebody taking actionable, basically actions based on whatever knowledge you have. From every studies, it tells us that it's about 3 to 8%, depending on what the action is, of all the people that will listen to something or hear something new or learn something new and actually take actionable, basically steps towards it. 3 to 8%, very small amount of people, and therefore we live in a world where, like you said, there's so much information. Be the titan of confidence of your industry. Be the person in which perhaps takes the courage to not only use their time and resources to engage their audience and to inform their audience, but be the person that is a reference perhaps in solving these problems, and the online world will be yours, certainly. Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you about a very, very talked about concept, which is niching down, right? You were just discussing about the fact that you have different industries and it depends on different industries. You really specialize in law firms, consultants, in service businesses, like you said. And I want to sort of philosophize together on niching down without shrinking your vision, because it's something that I get asked so often. And so I would love to sort of hear from you. Why did you choose the niche you serve, and how has that focus helped your business actually grow?
Yeah. Well, like I said, when I talked about how I fell into this business, I also kind of fell into my niche because it was a lawyer who first asked me to write blog posts for his business. And like I said, they were able and willing to give me some on-the-job training, especially as it came to the things lawyers are and are not allowed to say in their marketing content. So the fact that I was able to have that on-the-job training, and I found that I really liked working for them, which is not the case for everyone. Lawyers get a bad rap, at least here in the U.S., but and a lot of it, I think, is because they struggle to communicate effectively outside of a courtroom, at least. But I mean, what they're doing essentially comes down to saving our lives in some cases, saving our livelihoods most of the time. And so being able to put that into a really good story and into a story that people can understand, the benefit that these people provide was just I find really easy and really fun. So yeah, and then lawyers it was kind of a natural progression from that into the finance world, which again, a lot of people, again, the numbers tell a story, and I'm so glad that I I did finally figure that out after fighting my dad and learning math for most of my childhood. But being able to convey that in the content that I write for the finance people that I write for, who again are like the lawyers, but times 10, also have a lot of compliance issues that they have to deal with and things that they are and are not allowed to say for legal reasons. So being able to understand that, it was just kind of a natural progression from lawyer to those financial services professionals. So yeah, being able to write for them and position them as and both of those are, there's a million and one different lawyers and financial planners out there. And so figuring out a way to set yourself apart and as become that trusted advisor is really where I really had a lot of fun, honestly. But yeah, in terms of, I like what you said about not letting it shrink your vision, because I struggled with that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I have served those are my main audiences, my main client base, but that's not exclusively who I work with. And I had a business coach once who reminded me that your marketing persona is not your portfolio. Just because this is, who you're marketing to and who you're targeting does not mean that's all you serve. You're just trying to make it easy for the people who do fall really easily into that circle to self-select and raise their hand and say, yes, I want to work with you. I mean, as an example, there's another coach that I follow who specifically targets herself as being a coach for women. I can't even and I'm trying to remember now what her tagline is, but it is very blatantly and explicitly targeted to women. But she has men who listen to her podcast. She has male clients. It's not exclusive. It's just a way to make it really easy for those people who are attracted to that message to self-select and say, yeah, I want to work with you.
Right. It reminds me of Warren Buffett, right? He was talking about the fact that all the very successful people he knows says no to pretty much everything, but what they say yes to though is sort of their vehicle of mastering. And I think that's what you're referring to, is that if you still message, sometimes there's a few people in which you might think they're not part of that typical persona, but for whatever reason do resonate with the same message. And therefore, if you have the ability to empower them, then let's not limit ourselves to perhaps a niche that could expand if again needs and wants be. I think is quite important to sort of keep in touch with. I suppose one thing that you deliberately told me the last formal call that we had was the fact that you're scaling solo, right? So you're scaling solo, you like it a lot, which I really admire. And sort of the I suppose I want to talk about the challenges of freelance growth, but also we touch upon a few, I suppose, more positive traits of such a journey. But as a solo founder, obviously you build sort of your business, basically one client and one compelling post at a time, right? It's very systematic, but it's not very scalable because again, you are your business, perhaps, as we say. I would really love to sort of hear your the other side of the medal, and perhaps what has been the biggest challenge in growing your business as a solo entrepreneur, and perhaps which insights do you have for those trying to strive on a similar journey?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge is the obvious one, which is the fact that I have to do all of the things. I have to do all of the marketing and the client work and the sales calls and send out invoices and pay the bills on my end, right? So that it's just time. Time is always the biggest factor. And as far as how I deal with it, I mean, prioritization is a huge one. What is going to help me move the needle? Social media is another one where I don't do as much as I probably should because I know that I can't and should not try to be on all of the platforms all of the time, doing all of the things, because I could easily do that spend all my time doing that and not do anything else for my business. So prioritizing, this is where my audience is. This is where I get the most traction. Figuring out what's most powerful and what's going to get the biggest impact for your business and focusing on that and really zeroing in on it would be my biggest tip. And keep measuring that because that keeps changing. One example is the webinars that I did for, I think I did those for 2 or 3 years every month. And it started out, I would almost always get a client when I did a webinar. And then I think last year I did webinars and I did not get a single client all year long from a webinar. So it's like, all right, that's not working anymore. Time to try something new. So it was really freeing to ditch that and then go, okay, what's going to be the next thing that is going to get results for my business?
Yeah, so you stay quite flexible from the, I suppose, what I always tell people, specifically when they're solo, is stick to your values, stick to basically what you believe in. But again, the way in which, so the input is relatively basically similar, but the output will be different because the market is changing, right? So like you said, webinar might have been very powerful a few years ago, and maybe now it is oversaturated and people don't have perhaps the tools to make the right decisions. They don't want to make a mistake, and therefore they're paralyzing themselves, which happens very often across the whole medium of marketing channels, actually. So that's very interesting. I really want to, because it's been a while since I was not solo, right? I love people, I love scaling, I love to basically share it with others and grow with teams and so on. But what have you found being the most positive traits of being able to perhaps scale solo? Why is it so meaningful to you, and why do you feel very, very much, I suppose, entitled to sticking to such a vision?
Yeah, I think I think the hardest thing about it is also the best thing about it, which is that it's only me, right? And it's so freeing when it's only me. I don't have to worry about, am I bringing in enough to keep my employees on the payroll? That in itself is freeing, as long as I'm making enough to pay my own bills and keep dog food in the dog bowl. I'm happy and I don't have to worry about it. But there's also getting to control my own schedule. No one's expecting me in at the office, not having a zillion meetings. I mean, I do still have a fair number of Zoom meetings, but keeping that to a minimum, because I really am happiest when I'm just like sitting on my couch at my computer, writing and doing keyword research and reading up on marketing and doing the research is really, really my favorite thing. So getting to dig into it and really get into the weeds, because as I'm sure you've experienced, the bigger you get, the more high level you get, and then you have your employees digging into the weeds for you.
Yeah.
So I think it's really about like, what are you most attracted to? And I'm most attracted to like actually sitting down and doing the work. I'm not really attracted to the high level strategy. Okay, now you go and do it. You go and implement it while I, do the high level work.
Nice. One thing that is very important as for any businesses, but probably even more if you're basically a solo founder and want to keep a client base, specifically as sort of a mid to high tickets framework like you have, is building long-term relationships, right? We say this quite often, but it's much it's basically cheaper to retain a client than to get a new one. Just will always be, will always be, perhaps. And so I'm really interested to, because you seem to obviously emphasize empathy, sort of clarity as well, and even I think transparency from the way you were talking about it to me, right? So seeking to, again, to what works, being very deliberate about the things that maybe didn't work, and being very honest towards it. So I think that makes you very likable, very perhaps lovable person. But in your opinion, what are some practical ways basically you've been able to build loyalty and trust with long-term clients to make sure, again, that we stick to, I suppose, financial projection that are much more easier to basically deal with, but also just the love, I suppose, of creating bonds with people long-term.
Yeah. And that's something I'm still working on, just because it is one of those things that I think is easier said than done. And I think something that I'm constantly learning is that it starts at the beginning. Right at the beginning of the relationship is when you have to, I guess you could go even further back and say even before the client relationship begins, even when they're still a prospect and they're finding out about you, what is the information that they're learning? What are they learning about you? What expectations are you setting? And then the sales call, the onboarding process, working with you, the offboarding process, if there is one. All of that has to be consistent with everything that they've experienced with your brand before. So systematizing that and being really consistent about, I think for me, it's communicating with them when in the onboarding process or even in that sales process, because they want to know, okay, I know this is what you do. I know I need this, but what does this really look like? What can I expect moving forward? And so being really clear and consistent about, this is what I do, this is how it works, this is what you're going to get, this is when you're going to get it, and actually sticking to that and is huge. And that's something that I think often gets overlooked, is just, I can't remember who said, just do what the thing that you actually said you were going to do. That goes a long way towards building trust with people and maintaining that trust. For some reason, writers have a bad habit of not communicating with their clients. I don't understand how people can build a business that is communicating and yet fail to communicate with their own client. But there are so many horror stories of someone hiring a writer who then disappears and they never hear from them again. And they're like, what's going on? So just
what do you think that is?
I have no idea. I don't know if it's people who, if we get distracted, if they're the writers who, go down the rabbit hole a little too far and forget to come back to reality. I don't know if it's because they missed the deadline and they're embarrassed and they don't want to admit it. And they don't realize that their life could actually be a lot easier if they reach out and be like, I know, I'm sorry, I haven't forgotten about it, I am still working on it. And people get that, right? We all understand that life happens and things get in the way. And
absolutely,
if it's not a super hard deadline, then okay, thanks for letting me know. But there are so many people who I think are afraid of admitting that they missed the deadline, and they're afraid of letting people down, that they think, oh, it's just a fear response. They hide from it.
It's a fight and flight
rather than facing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think it always comes back to what Roosevelt said, right? But it's people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, perhaps. And I think it's a citation, it's a quote to live by, because, like you said, everybody, not some people, not sometimes, everybody much prefer if you go back to them and say, you know what, hey, I dropped the ball, right? I didn't follow up, or I didn't follow through. Or I said basically I was saying basically I was doing X, Y, Z and I didn't. And perhaps you might not even want to justify yourself. Just being very honest with yourself and the person you're interacting with, and just being very upfront with it goes a very long way. So I definitely agree with all of that, and it's a perfect sort of segue to where I was going with all of this, because one thing we discussed briefly, but I want to dive deeper into it with you, is the future of content in an AI-driven world. And I suppose the synergy between human and machine, I suppose, and where you're thinking that all of this perhaps madness will lead us to. But you seem to be very optimistic about AI. I saw a few of your blogs, and I spoke a few times with you as well, and you've always been very upfront with the fact that you retain sort of a very clear position, which is human empathy, nuance, and narrative will always win. And if AI can basically be a tool to help us do that with a better extent, then that's fantastic, right? So I suppose when you're thinking about just how fast things are evolving, how are you adapting your writing and strategy to work alongside AIs without losing the human voice? And yeah, just give me some insights on how I suppose all writers and creatives can perhaps use such thing to perhaps be less pessimistic or less afraid as well. I see a lot of afraid creatives. I'm sure you see a lot of them as well. So how do you stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I think it all comes back to understanding my ideal clients, because like I said, it is so much more than just, here's your 3 reasons to do XYZ or 5 ways to do such and such, right? It comes down to the emotions. Yes, people are going to find value in the tips and the resources that you provide and the knowledge that you provide. But it's the story that's going to keep them hooked. It's the emotional part of the story that's going to get them hooked. That's really going to resonate with them and convince them that you understand who they are and where they're coming from. AI right now is really bad at writing emotional content. It's really bad at the calls to action. And the stories that come out of things like ChatGPT are just laughable. So yeah, don't rely on it for that aspect. And again, it all comes back to people want to know you as a person. They also want to know your knowledge and experience. I mean, even in this podcast, you've asked me a million times about my experience with such and such. And that is where the value is, again, starting in the content that you create. So yes, use AI to organize your thoughts and do research and, brainstorm for you. I think it's great for a brainstorming tool when you've hit a writer's block.
Oh yeah.
But
I think it's fantastic.
Don't forget.
Actually.
Yeah, it's really good at that. But don't forget that you need your personal experience embedded in there, because with every piece of advice that you can give, you're going to find someone else out there saying the exact opposite. And what's going to convince people that your side is right is you going, look, I know that I'm right because I've seen this in my business and we've experienced XYZ in implementing these practices, right? So having that personal experience that you can fall back on and then explain to people in the content you provide is going to be absolutely instrumental in convincing them that you are the expert and you do know what you're talking about. And also not sounding super generic. Understanding your brand voice is key. And you can train AI to write in your brand voice, but that means you have to understand what your brand voice is. And a lot of people don't. So start with that strategy. Start with creating what your brand voice is, and then teach AI to write. If you go with the default AI, it's going to be super bland and vanilla and just more white noise, and no one will be attracted to that. So
I was having this debate with a fellow, perhaps AI enthusiast, technology enthusiast. To me, again, specifically from a creative perspective, there's so much more than substance alone. So take for example, a music artist. All right. Yes, there is basically how good they are at singing. Yes, how good perhaps the writing is, and so on. But let's just say that AI can mimic that perfectly. Let's just say that, just for the sake of this hypothesis, I don't think it's there yet, but we're definitely going to be seeing this before the end of the decade, without a shadow of a doubt. That said, they are exactly as good, basically, or maybe slightly even better. Would it matter? Yes, but the reason why you love Taylor Swift or you love Led Zeppelin, or you love whoever basically it is because of who they are. All right. Not
Yeah.
just because basically the talent that they have, but their flaws. And you see them basically being humans. And you see some people follow the relationship. I'm not that type of guy, but I know a lot of people love doing that. There's a
Yeah, for sure.
there's a narrative, there's a story basically behind it. Even if you were a robot, basically having the most beautiful voice since Freddie Mercury, the fact that you were a robot without a soul, without intuitions, without again the human appeal, the intuitions, I believe won't be nearly as impactful. I have still a very hard time believing that we'll be having basically a robot on stage and people following it just like they were following it Elvis or Michael Jackson or of the Beatles, for example, or even more recently, right, Taylor Swift and so on, because at the end of the day, it is much more than what they sing or what they perhaps the art form is. It is who they are and who they became perhaps through it. So to me, my opinion always come back to, I think it was Christian Lewis Lange that was saying this, which is technology is a useful servant, but a very dangerous master. So as long as we stay in control of basically what we want them to do, them being the machines, it will always, I think, always be very, very impactful to utilize it. And look, what we know from history is that we always adapt. All right, we're always very fearful of something new because that's human nature, and then it changed basically how we live, and we adapt actually quite decently well because that's why we're so dominating as dominating as a species is our ability to perhaps adapt ourselves with our environments, right? That's what Einstein was talking a lot about. So for you, if you had to, you said you're using it for strategy and brainstorming. Do you also start to use it for admin and client follow-ups and touch-ups, or you're not there yet?
The admin and that stuff, no, not so much. I've been using it primarily currently for research. A lot of those repetitive tasks, AI is great at. Anything you find yourself doing over and over again, is there an AI that can do this for me?
Yes.
Having AI do research for you, again, don't rely on it 100%, especially if it's something like ChatGPT. But giving it a bunch of data and having it analyze the data for you, is awesome. I actually used it fairly recently. I was trying to create a course and I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted the course to look like. So I just brain dumped a bunch of stuff into a Word document and told ChatGPT took that and dumped it into ChatGPT and said, create a course for me based on this information. And it was awesome because then I didn't have to think about all of that. It was like, oh yeah, you take this and you put it over here and you do this over here and ta-da, there's your course in a few seconds. It was awesome. So that the organizing and the analyzing is what I find AI to be most useful for right now.
Beautiful. What do you, in a few sentences, what do you think the future of content will be in an AI-driven world?
I have no idea, and I feel like the more I read about it, the less sure I am about where we're going with all this, because it keeps changing. I do really like what you said about, first of all, niching down is going to be super important because
Nice.
AI takes information. I never even call it like AI generated anything because it's not. It's AI repurposed. They take stuff that already exists and they repurpose it into what it thinks that you want. So
Yes.
it's not AI generated anything. It's AI repurposed. So the more you niche down and the more specific you get with what you're doing and how you're doing it and who you're doing it for, the less likely you're going to be replaced by AI, because it's not going to be able to aggregate content about that. And when it does, it'll be from your website because you're the only one writing specifically about that. And again, the people who are the more you niche down, that's the niches where the riches are, right? That's where people are like, I need someone who does this specifically for me in this place. Who can I find who does that? And they're going to find you if you're the only one or one of the only ones doing that. So niching down is going to be a big one. I still think this always the story, the human connection, and and your own personal experience. Get out there and research and play around with, AI and whatever tools in your industry are the big thing right now, and get to know them so that you can talk about them and educate your audience about them in a way that makes sense to them, because that's the only way that you're going to attain and maintain that status as the thought leader in your industry. It's always about thought leadership, and it always will be.
Beautiful. Well, it seemed like we agree. So for all the creatives that are perhaps a little bit afraid, there's nothing wrong with being afraid. Try to perhaps educate yourself. Sometimes it does work and does help basically with mitigating fear, because we typically fear what we don't understand more than what we do. But
100%.
You won't lose your job to AI, but maybe you'll lose it to somebody that can use it effectively. So I would say, get at it slowly but surely, because it is here to stay. But Alison Ver Halen, was an absolute blast to just have this conversation with you, from the very good beginning to somewhat the very future, perhaps, of all these things involving. And I would be really, really honored if you could leave us with some last words of wisdom, please.
Oh, yeah. Consistency is another one. I don't think we touched on that in this episode, which is unusual, because it's something that I harp on all the time, is consistency in terms of not only creating content, like when you create it and when you publish it and distribute it, but again, consistency in your brand, in educating your prospects and providing value for them. That should be every single piece of content that you create. Just be as consistent as you can in all of the content that you're creating, because that's what's going to set that expectation with not only your prospects, but again, your clients. Is they're going to expect that working with you looks a certain way. So be consistent, and then do the thing you're going to tell them that you did.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.